She set him up on a blind date. Planned the whole thing, hyped it for years. She even postponed it once to make sure everything was just right, she said. And when he finally walked through those restaurant doors, new haircut, fresh outfit, butterflies doing their thing, he knew within 60 seconds that something was deeply wrong. The woman sitting across from him was not the woman he had been promised. Not even close. And instead of walking out or making a scene, or confronting Chelsey directly, he did something far more surgical. He sat down, he picked up the menu, he smiled, and then he started asking questions. Very specific questions. Questions that referenced a job this woman didn't have, a show she'd apparently never heard of, a restaurant she'd never worked at in her life. And with every single question, the woman who had organized this little gathering, the one who had been dangling this setup for years, started to unravel. She tried to laugh it off. She tried to redirect. She tried everything. But it was too late. Because by the end of that dinner, in front of her fiancé and a stranger who just wanted a fair shot at meeting someone real, the truth was out. Chelsey had swapped the girl, and she never imagined anyone would figure it out. Let me take you back to where this all began. To understand how we got here, you have to understand the setup. And the setup goes back years. Our guy, let's call him Marcus because he deserves a name, worked at a place where he met a coworker named Chelsey. Now, Chelsey was the kind of person who turned heads. Confident, put together, effortlessly attractive. Not the kind of woman who needed to work hard to get noticed. And Marcus noticed her the way you notice someone who's clearly out of reach, appreciatively, with absolutely no illusions about it. But here's what you need to know about Chelsey. She had this habit. Every few months, out of nowhere, she'd bring up her friend Nicole. You'd be such a good fit for Nicole. And Marcus, being a normal human being, was intrigued. Chelsey was beautiful. Her friends, she'd implied, were the same. So the first time she said it, he asked the obvious question, is she cute? Chelsey rolled her eyes. Classic. He filed that away. Next time she brought it up, and there was always a next time, he adjusted. What do we have in common? He asked instead. Better, more thoughtful, and Chelsey actually smiled. They're both tall, she told him. Same sense of humor, same taste in shows. She'd love you, Chelsey would say with the breezy confidence of someone who has never once followed through on a thing in their life. And then nothing. The setup would fizzle. Weeks would pass, then months. And then Chelsey would bring it up again, fresh, like she'd completely forgotten the last conversation, like they were starting from zero. Marcus started to notice the pattern. Here's the question that kept nagging at him, though. Why does someone keep dangling a setup they never intend to deliver? What is it you're actually selling? That question would eventually answer itself. Time passed, jobs changed. Life moved on the way it always does, not in dramatic pivots but in slow drifts. Marcus and Chelsey fell out of each other's daily orbit. Different routines, different paths. He thought about Nicole occasionally, the way you think about a door that was never quite opened. Then, a couple of years later, Marcus is walking past a high-end liquor store near his office, and he spots a familiar face behind the counter. Chelsey. Looking as polished as ever, working in a place that suited her perfectly. They caught up warmly, the way people do when enough time has passed to soften everything. It was nice, actually. Genuine, and then, almost inevitably, Chelsey brought up Nicole again. Same spiel, same talking points, they'd be a great fit. Nicole is tall, same sense of humor. She waitresses at a nice restaurant nearby. But this time, Chelsey had a new detail. She said she remembered one afternoon at their old job when Marcus had spent a solid 20 minutes talking to her about The Walking Dead. And that same night, hanging out with Nicole after work, Nicole had basically repeated every opinion Marcus had expressed, word for word, without having any idea where those thoughts had come from. Chelsey thought that was hilarious. Marcus thought it was something closer to a sign. So this time he pushed. He didn't let the conversation drift into the usual warm but vague, we should make this happen void. He asked for a date, a time, a place. And to his genuine surprise, Chelsey delivered. A double date, her fiancé, Marcus, and Nicole. She texted him later that afternoon with the details. Marcus went home, found Nicole's social media, and well, yeah, she was stunning. The kind of profile that makes you refresh the page twice just to confirm what you're looking at. He started looking forward to this dinner, more than he'd looked forward to anything in recent memory. The morning of the date, his phone buzzed. It was Chelsey. She needed to postpone. Something had come up, she didn't explain much beyond that, just said she was sorry and proposed the same restaurant, same setup 1 week later. Marcus was disappointed. Of course he was. But these things happen. And if he was being honest with himself, maybe it gave him a little more time to prepare. So he prepared. Genuinely, almost embarrassingly prepared. He got a fresh haircut. The kind of haircut where the barber does that thing with the hot towel and you leave feeling like a different person. He picked out a new outfit, something that said effort without screaming it. He looked up the restaurant, read a few reviews, memorized a couple of things about the menu so he'd have something real to say about it if the conversation went there. And then he did something he probably wouldn't have admitted to at the time. He reviewed his mental file on Nicole. Everything Chelsey had told him, assembled piece by piece over years of half-finished conversations. She was tall. She loved The Walking Dead. She waitressed at a good restaurant nearby. She and Chelsey had been close since they were kids. He had a detailed composite sketch of a person he'd never actually met, built entirely from second-hand descriptions and one long-forgotten afternoon of television opinions. He felt ready, maybe too ready. The kind of ready that comes from expectations stacking on top of hope, stacking on top of years of almost. He arrived at the restaurant exactly on time. He straightened his collar in the reflection of the window glass, took a breath, and pushed open the door. And within about 30 seconds of stepping inside, something felt wrong. He just couldn't name it yet. The table was set for 4. Chelsey and her fiancé were already there, seated and comfortable. And next to Chelsey, right beside her, close enough that there was no ambiguity about who the 4th person was, sat a woman Marcus had never seen before. And I want to be precise about something here, because this is the part where people sometimes rush to judgment. Marcus wasn't shallow in the cartoon sense of the word. He wasn't upset that a woman didn't meet some abstract standard of appearance. He was a person who had been told, specifically and repeatedly, that the woman he was being set up with had a particular job, a particular height, a particular history with Chelsey that went back to childhood, a specific set of opinions about a specific television show. He had been sold a detailed story. And the woman at that table didn't match any of it. Not the height, not the build, not the job, she worked at a daycare, not a restaurant. She was not the person he had been told about, she was simply someone else. He sat down, he shook hands, he smiled, but apparently not convincingly enough because Chelsey clocked it immediately. The table got quiet in that very specific way, the way where everyone in the room knows something has shifted, but no one is ready to name it. Marcus looked at Chelsey. Chelsey looked at her fiancé. The fiancé found something deeply interesting about his bread plate. And the woman sitting across from Marcus, innocent, showing up in good faith to meet someone who might like her, looked around the table with the expression of someone who has just walked into a conversation that paused the moment she arrived. Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to leave. He wasn't going to make a scene. He was going to stay. He was going to order dinner. And he was going to have a very particular kind of conversation. Here is where things get surgical. Marcus wasn't angry, not visibly. He wasn't cold or rude or pointed in any way that could be called out directly. He was, in fact, the most pleasant version of himself he'd been all evening. Engaged, curious, attentive. But the questions he started asking were precisely, deliberately, unmistakably aimed at the ghost of a different Nicole. He turned to the woman across from him, warm, genuine, and said, with what sounded like totally normal first date interest, "Chelsey mentioned you're a waitress at one of the places near here. Which one? I know that neighborhood pretty well." She blinked. She told him she worked at a daycare. "Oh," Marcus said with exactly the right amount of mild confusion. "I must have gotten that mixed up, sorry." A beat. He took a sip of water. Then, so, The Walking Dead. "Are you still as obsessed as you used to be, or did you fall off after the Glenn thing?" The woman looked genuinely puzzled. "I don't think I've ever really watched it, honestly." "Really?" said without sarcasm. Just quiet. Measured, like someone cataloging a discrepancy, like someone building a case one entry at a time. And here's the thing about the way Marcus did this: he didn't press. He didn't repeat himself. He didn't make anyone feel stupid. He simply filed it away visibly with a small nod, and then asked the next question. He asked how long she and Chelsey had been friends. "Since our 20s, really," she said. "Oh, I always thought it was much longer than that," Marcus said, looking at Chelsey with what might have passed for pleasant surprise. Chelsey said something quickly about college. Marcus nodded. He let the silence sit for 1 second too long. That second did a lot of work. Chelsey was doing her best, and to be fair to her, her best was genuinely impressive. She was quick on her feet, charming under pressure, and every time Marcus dropped one of his precisely placed questions, she'd pivot. She'd laugh it off. She'd redirect the table with a story, an anecdote, some warmer territory. She was working the room with the focused efficiency of someone who has made a mistake and is buying herself time. But here's the thing about covering something up. Every layer you add makes the shape underneath more visible, not less. Each deflection was itself a data point. Each too-quick redirect told Marcus exactly where the truth was being protected. And across the table, the woman who had come to this dinner in good faith was getting quieter. Not hostile, not upset in any visible, confrontational way, just quieter. Smaller. That confused, faintly uncomfortable silence of someone who can sense the temperature of a room and knows, on some level, that they are not what this evening is actually about. It is not a good feeling to be in the middle of someone else's situation without a map. And then both women excused themselves to the bathroom at the same time. Which, look, we all know what that is. That's not a coincidence. That is a summit meeting. That is Chelsey pulling her aside to figure out what is happening and whether anything can be salvaged. Marcus watched them go. He set down his fork. And across the table, Chelsey's fiancé, who had been methodically and quietly eating his way through the last 45 minutes of dinner, slowly looked up from his plate. His expression was tired. Knowing. The expression of a man who has watched this woman he loves make a particular kind of decision before, and had a very good idea of how it was going to turn out. The fiancé set down his fork. He didn't look around the restaurant to make sure no one was within earshot. He just said, quietly and directly, "What exactly are you doing?" And Marcus told him, not dramatically, not with heat in his voice. He simply walked the fiancé through it, clearly and methodically. "This is what Chelsey told me about Nicole over several years and several conversations. This is what the woman sitting across from me tonight has told me about herself. And here, specifically, is where those two things do not match." He listed the inconsistencies. The job, the show, the timeline of the friendship. He laid them out like evidence because that's what they were. The fiancé listened to all of it. He was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "She did mean to set you up with a different Nicole." Marcus waited, because that sentence obviously had a second half. But the fiancé continued. The original Nicole kept asking to postpone, and it became pretty clear she wasn't really interested. He paused. You could almost see him choosing his next words, and then apparently deciding that precision mattered less than just saying the thing. "So Chelsey found someone else," he said. "Someone more in your league." Marcus gave him a look. Just a look. One of those flat, sustained looks that doesn't need anything added to it. And the fiancé, to his credit, heard himself. He backpedaled almost immediately. "Okay, what I mean is, she found another Nicole." But the correction landed too late to do any real work, because that phrase, "more in your league," had already settled into the air between them like something permanent. Chelsey hadn't just organized a Baytan switch. She had made a quiet, private judgment about who Marcus deserved, and then she had carried out that judgment without asking him a single thing about it. Let's sit with that for a moment, because this is the part that actually matters, the part that turns this from a story about a bad blind date into something else entirely. Chelsey didn't accidentally mix up two friends. She didn't describe Nicole incorrectly out of carelessness or bad memory. She had deliberately, over years of repeating conversations, constructed a picture of a specific person. Tall, a waitress, a Walking Dead fan, a childhood friend, a perfect match. All of that was real. All of it applied to the original Nicole, the one who had apparently decided she wasn't interested. Maybe she'd lost interest. Maybe she'd never been particularly interested to begin with and had been quietly buying time with a string of postponements. We don't know. But what we do know is that when the original plan fell apart, Chelsey did not pick up the phone and call Marcus. She did not say, "Hey, this isn't going to work out with Nicole, but I might know someone else you'd like. Want me to make an introduction?" She found a different woman who also happened to be named Nicole. She sat her down at the same table, and she let Marcus show up, prepared, invested, having carried this forward in good faith for years, and discover the switch in real time, at dinner, with nowhere to go. Think about what that actually is. Chelsey decided, without asking, that Marcus wasn't quite right for the original Nicole. And then she decided, without asking, that this other woman was a more appropriate match. That she was his speed, his level, the Nicole that fit. She made both of those calls completely unilaterally, without Marcus's knowledge, without his input, without a single conversation where he had any say in what was being chosen for him. And then she dressed it up as a favor. That is not a favor. That is control wearing kindness as a costume. And the reason Marcus couldn't sit quietly through dinner and let it pass is because Chelsey had used a real person, a real connection, years in the making, to build his enthusiasm, and then quietly swapped that person out like the switch wouldn't matter. Like he wouldn't notice. Like he wasn't worth the truth. A wide shot of 4 people exiting a restaurant at night, pausing under the warm amber glow of the entrance awning. They are close in distance, but separated by posture. Body language is closed, arms drawn in, eyes not quite meeting. Two couples saying strained goodbyes on a quiet city sidewalk, the dark street behind them broken by the slow blur of passing headlights. Shot from across the street with a 50 mm lens at natural height, observational. Slightly removed, the geometry of four people who no longer want to be in the same frame. 16. 9 widescreen landscape, cinematic realism, grounded drama. This story works as a cold karma story, not because of some massive public takedown, not because anyone was fired or humiliated on a stage or lost everything they'd built. It works because of something smaller and more precise. When you manipulate someone's choices and call it care, you are not being kind. You are being controlling. And controlling people tend to believe they will never get caught. They bet on the passivity of the person they've underestimated. They count on that person accepting the situation, chalking up the inconsistencies to bad memory or miscommunication, and moving on quietly. Chelsey bet on Marcus doing exactly that. He didn't. And here's what this story asks you honestly. Have you ever had someone decide what you deserved without asking you? Have you ever been made into someone else's project, managed, sorted, assigned to an appropriate category by someone who called it friendship? If you have, you know exactly how it felt when that fiancé said those words across the table, more in your league, and you probably understand why Marcus couldn't just sit still and let it pass. Cold karma doesn't always look like a dramatic reckoning. Sometimes it looks like dinner questions. Sometimes it looks like a flat look across a restaurant table that says, I already know, I've known for a while, and now so does everyone else. If this one hit differently than you expected, drop a like, leave a comment, let me know what you think. New stories of justice, betrayal, and karma post here every single day. Someone's story is going to hit exactly the nerve you needed. Stick around.